Just a few miles away from here is Dr. Phillips Hospital, named after this area, Dr. Phillips, in which we sit. I didn't really know how Dr. Phillips came to be in detail until I walked down the hall in the hospital, and they have this great picture wall that's very educational. It talks about, in pictures and some little signs, the transition of this from Dr. Phillips orange groves into what it is now. So there's pictures of the groves, there's pictures of the Sand Lake packing plant, of old orange trucks, and all different things. The picture wall sort of tells part of the story of this geography. But if you keep walking, there's a whole nother set of pictures of people that work at the hospital now, right? And so you've got a history wall of pictures and a present day wall of pictures, and the collection of them tell you part of the story, but not the whole story. They don't tell you that this land, before it was orange groves, belonged to the Seminole people from whom it was taken. They don't tell you about all of the deaths that had happened in that place, or the lives that have been saved in that place, and the healing that has happened, right? It's a snapshot of little bits of the story. Now, I would bet that lots of us have picture walls at home. We have one. It's got our wedding picture and parents' wedding pictures, grandparents, pictures of nieces, nephews, kind of things. And when you look at those pictures, there's a mixture of celebration and also grief, right? My parents aren't with us anymore, so I can look at my own wedding picture with joy and look at their wedding picture with some sadness. So those picture walls, again, tell part of our story in the joys and in the sorrows, but not the whole story. When I was on sabbatical a couple of summers ago, I visited all of the churches that my parents and grandparents grew up in, and they're all Lutheran for the most part, and as almost every Lutheran church I've ever been in, they had a picture wall, and what was on the picture wall? Not pastors. We don't have a wall of pastors here. What's the other one? Confirmation classes, right? And you see those pictures. We have a confirmation wall. It is not done. We got to get some more pictures framed and put up there. But those pictures, too, tell part of the story. If you look at those pictures, you'll see the joys of kids, right, affirming their baptisms, but also some sorrows, because sometimes you look and see that maybe one of those young people died too young. But there's another grief that happens when you look at those confirmation pictures. My mom's confirmation picture, the class was so big that I had to look at the picture for a good while to try to find her. And some of you are old enough that you probably had 30 or 40 people in your confirmation class. If you go back to that same congregation today, is the confirmation class that big? It's not. So when we walk down that wall and look at those pictures, part of the lament that we carry is that the church maybe isn't what we remember it to be. And when we land in those spaces, then one of the things we do is go, gosh, wouldn't it be great to be back there again, where the confirmation class was so big that the picture took up the whole chancel? Wouldn't it be great if all those young people were still around, right? There's a lament that something has happened. Now, I've been in Florida Bahama Synod here in the ELCA since 2010. If they had a wall, they do have a picture wall in the Senate House, but it's not a picture of all the congregations. But if it was, just a picture of the congregations, each building or location of worship up there, and if you had taken them down for every congregation that closed since I've been here, there'd be a lot of gaps. We had over 200 congregations in this Synod before I got here, and now I think we're down to 160. So some of those picture walls are no more, right? The pictures have been packed up and put away, and we can lament that, because whenever one of those places closes, then I wonder who's around to tell people that God loves them unconditionally. So we lament, we celebrate, all of that is wrapped up in the picture wall. And it's not just, right, our own lives and the church. Our culture is the same way. We spend a tremendous amount of energy wanting to go back to the way things were, whether that's a certain kind of job that we lament there aren't enough of, or a certain morality that we want to talk about. And we think if we could just go back, then things would be better. Today we heard the story, part of the story of Samuel. There were not photographs when Samuel was around, but let's imagine there was a sketch artist in town who drew little pictures, and that Samuel had an office somewhere and had a picture wall in his office. You see, Samuel predated the monarchy. And before the monarchy, God raised up judges to lead the people of Israel. And Samuel was one of those judges. And by the story's account, he did a pretty good job. And then his sons come along, and they start to participate. They did not do a good job. They were corrupt. So the people get fed up, and they say, we want a king. And God says, no, you don't. And they say, yes, we do, please. And God says, well, here's what's going to happen if you have a king. It's going to take all your young men away to war. Going to take your young women and turn them into perfume makers. It's going to take all of your best crops. That's what's going to happen. And they say, okay, please give us a king. So Samuel is the one that's sent out to anoint Saul as the first king of the people of Israel. So he goes from being the judge to the anointer of the king. And as the story unfolds, it sounds like he's an advisor to the king. And Saul does okay for a little bit of time, but pretty quickly goes off the rails. There's a point in time where Samuel is supposed to show up and offer some sacrifices, and Saul doesn't feel like waiting, so he just does it himself, right? He's impatient. He does indeed continually take them to war. And by the time we get to the chapter just before the story we heard, God has told Samuel, Saul is not faithful. He's not going to be the king anymore. Chapter 16 opens with us hearing God say to Samuel, why do you still grieve for Saul, is basically the question. Well, if we back up, Samuel had a role in building all of this, right? He's invested in the community. He served as the judge. He anointed the king. He was an advisor to the king. He helped build the whole thing. And so now to hear that Saul isn't going to be the king anymore, he's lamenting. He's grieving that this whole thing, all of his energy poured into this for years and years and years, is now going to fall apart and be taken away. Much in the same way that we can grieve our own journeys, our church journeys, our cultural journeys, to say all of this energy we have put into building these things, and now it seems like it's just fallen apart. So God says, how long have you grieved Saul? And then says, I've got work for you to do. You're going to go and find this guy Jesse, and you're going to anoint a new king. Now Samuel says, that sounds like a terrible idea. If I do that, Saul's going to kill me. Have you ever faced a change where you've thought, man, if I do that, that'll just kill me, like metaphorically? Samuel's not talking metaphor. He really thinks Saul will kill me if I go anoint a new king. And God says, yeah, okay, go. So he goes, and he finds Jesse, and he goes and says, well, here's my son. And he goes, nope, not that one. And they go through 7 of them, right? Nope. And then Samuel has to say, is that it? And then Jesse goes, well, there's one more, but he's watching the sheep, right? Which tells us that no one expected David to be the one. So if you track this story, there's a couple of things happening. First, God has anointed a king. But when the king was no longer life-giving in his leadership, God tore that down and is going to build something new in its place. So that's the first thing. When it's no longer life-giving, it goes away and something new gets raised up. The second thing is that Samuel is given room to lament, right? To give voice to what he is grieving. Then, when he gets his new assignment, he's afraid, and he gets to give voice to that, right? Because he doesn't want to do it. But then when he goes, 2 things happen. First off, the person that God raises up to do the new thing is the least expected of the bunch. Nobody expected it to be David. But the second thing is, who's going to anoint David the king? Samuel, right? He should be retired by now. He did all the work. He anointed the king. I don't think they had retirement back then, but he should be able to just, go play golf or do whatever he wanted to do in his retirement. But that's not what happens. Even as God is tearing down the thing that he helped build, he is called to help with the new thing. So the new thing is a combination of the old guy that probably only has a little bit of energy left and the new one that was the least expected. This is a phenomenal story of how God brings new things into the world. So if we think about our own journeys, the first place we can start is where Samuel does, and that's lament. To give voice to our grief. We're not very good at that. We like to just keep moving. But to stop and say, you know what? My life is not what I thought it was going to be. Or this job isn't working out the way I thought it was going to. Or this relationship is really weighing me down, right? Give voice to our lament. We can do it as a culture. We can do it as a church. When we do it as a church, we say, where's all the young people that we wish were here? What about those glory days when there were 500 people here and we were on Easter and you couldn't find a seat? That's lament. Now, if the story holds true, maybe, and I'm going to talk about the church in particular, but this applies to our culture and our lives, maybe the thing that was life-giving for all of us that are sitting here, who maybe helped build this place or other places of the church, maybe what was life-giving for us isn't life-giving anymore for the people that aren't here. And the church has always been called out, right? So if it's not life-giving for us, or if it is maybe life-giving for us, but not for everybody else, what might be happening? Maybe God's tearing down what God built to build something new. And if God's tearing down what God built to build something new, is that going to be scary for us that are here? Yeah. Does that mean we get to just go hide? No, right? Samuel says, I'm afraid. And God says, fine, go. So maybe God's tearing something down and build something new. So if that's happening, who is God calling to do that? Those that were here, who may be grieved that the thing is falling apart, and also someone that we least expect. Right? We don't get to retire from being church. As long as we are breathing, God is calling us into this world to bring grace and life and love and all the rest of it. So we still have work to do, but that work is going to be partnered with someone we least expect. If we could expect who it was, I could tell you who it was, but we can't, so we just have to trust that God is going to stir something up new. Now, for me, this means paying attention to the stuff I didn't expect. I didn't expect to be doing a baptism last week in Portuguese and English. I didn't expect 2 of the last 3 funerals I did to be in Spanish and English. I didn't expect a phone call of the Muslim women asking if they could use our space for pre-Ramadan stuff, right? What is happening? I don't know, but I didn't expect it, so I should probably pay attention to it, even if sometimes it makes us uncomfortable, because it's in that space that God might be tearing something down, calling us into someplace new, along with the least expected people that might carry us there. The picture wall we have here is not done. We're going to run out of space on our wall. If we could go back to Samuel, if he had a picture wall, his, right, didn't necessarily tell the whole great story all the time. When you get to the space of Jesus, he has to die for new life to happen. And as you continue forward through the story, there's always something going away and something new happening. And if we always were trying to add a picture to the wall every time something new came along, we'd run out of space real quick. Does God's picture wall ever run out of space? No. Amen.